John Mellencamp has been busy working on new music, and our own Lisa Lee talked with the music icon to get all of the details and to find out what inspires him in his songwriting. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I think that as a songwriter, you have always had a very keen eye about writing about what's the reality in America, what's going on. And this record to me almost seems like a state of the union of this moment. So what got you thinking in those terms when you were writing these songs?
Well, I don't know. Whenever I write, I try to, sounds funny, but I try to keep an open mind about what I'm writing about it. Sometimes I squeak my opinions in there, but generally I don't. I try to be objective about things that I'm writing about, and I don't want the songs to come off preachy or anything, so I try to keep an open mind. But I don't know, I didn't really know what the album was going to be about until I wrote Ghost Towns Along the Highway, and then I knew that, oh, this is what the record needs to be about. And Ghost Towns works on a couple levels. When you first listen to it, you would think it's a geographical thing about small towns and small villages disappearing. But if you go below that, it's about us and, kind of looking in the mirror and saying, hey, this is what I have done and the path that I have taken and the ghost towns in my soul. And so I was very cognizant of trying to write on different levels.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think people got it and sometimes they didn't.
That's the beauty of music though, right? And open to interpretation.
Sure, yeah, well, it is as long as the interpretation is positive.
Well, and with our country, that is such a positive and optimistic, I don't know if patriotic's the word, because sometimes people think that's a bad word, patriotic, but it's such a positive song. What particularly inspired that one?
Well, I was watching a few years ago, I was watching our president, and he was talking about, they asked him, they said, so how do you feel about the treatment that the Dixie Chicks have got? And he was very smug about it, and he goes, well, that's the price of freedom. And he was very smug about it, and that's when I wrote that song, which, hence, it says, down the Dixie Highway back home. There is a Dixie Highway, but so it was just kind of trying to be open-minded about this country. There's room enough here for science to live. There's room enough here for religion to forgive. It's a big place. There's enough room for a lot of ideas, and I don't think that we should be saying, okay, well, we're not teaching this, and we're teaching that, and we got to have this. There's too many people that just getting in the way of having a nice world by saying, oh no, well I can't do that. I can't have my kid in a school that says the Pledge of Allegiance. What? I can't have my kid in a school that can't pray. I can't have my kid in a school that teaches doesn't teach creation. What? Isn't our brain big enough to take in all of this information and then let the individual make that decision of what that individual believes? If you hide information from people, don't want people to see the 10 Commandments, or you don't want people to hear about Darwin, then, aren't we hiding things that we know from our future generation? And I just think that that's incorrect.
Yeah.
That's not the America that I believe in.
And actually, I want to ask you about this one song that I didn't understand, and I don't normally admit that in an interview, but the hidden track. I listened to that so many times.
Now, what don't you understand about that?
It seems on its face that it's definitely an anti-war.
It is an anti-war
song, but I could not figure out who the rodeo clown was, or was supposed to be.
Well, I think the rodeo clown, she. It refers in the song to she.
Right, which threw me.
Yeah, she is Lady Liberty.
Okay.
With freedom, there's responsibility. And if you abuse that responsibility, then the word freedom is not to be thrown around like other words that we throw around, like love You know, just throw it around. Well, this is for freedom. Well, I don't know. Is it for freedom? I say in another song, sometimes you wonder what kind of freedom they're talking. Now, what kind of freedom have you got going here, man? I mean, who's really prospering from this freedom that you're talking about? So they're pretty fast and loose with that word.
Yeah. That freedom's often about pride.
Well, I think that freedom is also about greed. You know, I think us as civilians always have to remember there's always an agenda that we don't know about. I also say on Freedom's Road, no one wants to know you if there's no pork in your barrel. And that's like, most people don't even consider these laws that get passed and all the pork that's in there. And it costs us millions and millions of dollars. The average worker, the below average, the blue collar worker, the guys that sweep the floors and clean the commodes. And these people are paying dearly for these pork barrel things that are hidden. There was a piece of pork a few years ago that affected me directly. A friend of mine who was the editor of Billboard magazine called up and said, "Hey John, they just passed a law that in a few years all of your songs are going to be work for hire and you don't own them anymore." I said, "Oh, you're full of shit. There's no way that could be." But they did. They hid it down at the bottom of something and nobody read it. Of course, nobody reads these things. And they hid it down there and all of a sudden it was true. All artists' work would revert to artists for hire, which meant the record companies owned everything.
And what happened with that?
Well, once this guy got on the phone and said, "Are you aware of this?" Don Henley got together an organization of people and they went to Washington and had it overturned because it was such an unfair thing that once lawmakers saw what it was like, how in the world did that ever get put in here?
Nobody read it.
Nobody read it.
Yeah.
Nobody paid any attention. And, you know, they probably had it couched and had it spun so it looked like a good thing. We're taking care of artists.
Yeah.
You know, we're taking care of these people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Taking care of us, all right.
Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that you, speaking of artists in general, I know that you've always been very inclusive, of bringing other people in, working with other people that you believed in.
Oh, I need the help I can get.
Yeah. I don't know about that, but Little Big Town, obviously, on this record with you.
Yes.
How did you hook up with them, and what was it about them and their music that you liked?
Oh, I thought Karen was cute.
Well, that's as good a reason as any, right?
No, I'm just teasing. Oh, I do think she's cute. But I think her husband's a nice guy, too.
Yeah.
No, actually, I'd heard them sing, and I would thought, wow. And they opened up for me and did a few shows, about 30-some shows for me, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when I was out playing, and they did really well. I mean, considering you're walking into an arena in front of my audience, and you're, country-ish type of band, and they did great. And so I kind of got to know them a little bit, and so when I started designing how this record was going to sound in my head, it was like, oh, I'm going to have these kids do this. I'm going to have Little Big Town do these background parts because I know that they'll be able to deliver because they're, forget country, forget rock. They're just really a nice vocal group.
Yeah.
There used to be a vocal group called Rose, Chalmer, and Rose back in the 70s, and whenever you heard these beautiful background vocals, it was always Rose, Chalmer, and Rose, and they were from Miami. Well, it turns out that one of the guys in Little Big Town, that was his mom's sister that was in Rose, Chalmer, and Rose. He goes, I said something about Rose, Chalmer, and Rose, and he goes, that was my aunt.
That's some good karma going on
Yeah,
there or something
pretty
coming
cool.
around to you. Do you think they'll go on the road with you this year?
It's in discussion, but it'll be a different type of road. I want to try to put together something called the Freedom's Road Show, which is kind of like this traveling carnival where, I'll come out and play, and then they'll come out and be in my band for a little bit, and then they'll play, and then maybe we'll get Joan Baez to sing. I haven't talked to anybody about any of this, I'm just talking out loud.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd be on board for all that. That sounds cool. Speaking of country music, I've been listening to you my whole life, and I think that I've always thought of you as rock and roll when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, I've began to appreciate your music on different levels, and I think you've always had the instrumentation, the songwriting heart that country music has. Do you think your music has changed, and now that it's in the country genre, or do you think the format has changed and it's just enveloped what you've always been doing?
I think country has changed tremendously. I think country has totally changed, because country music when I was a kid, you know, was Hank Williams. And that was a long way away. Well, not really, I don't think. I mean, if you put Hank and Elvis together, there wasn't that much difference. But as, you know, as the Beatles showed up and the English invasion, then I think country music got pretty far away from rock and roll. And then you had the psychedelic music coming from the West Coast. And I think it got pretty far away, but as time goes on, it's kind of going, you know. And I think that that's going to continue to happen, and it's going to happen more as time, as the years go by, at least the way that it looks like to me the music's going.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable with your music being played on CMT and country radio? Do you think it's a good fit?
I don't really have thoughts like that. I mean, I just think that if the song's good, sing it, you know. I don't care who's doing it. I don't care if it's a country act. I don't care if it's a rock act. If it's a good song, sing it. You know, when I was growing up, radio was really a cool place to be. You know, I could hear James Brown into Conway Twitty, into, you know, the Young Rascals, into the Beatles, into the Rolling Stones, into Johnny Cash, and it was all the same radio station, and to me it was all music. You know, I'm an indiscriminate listener. I love music. I love all kind of music, from country to jazz to rock to folk, you know. So I have big ears. I mean, I love listening to music. I'm always looking for somebody to make me break down and cry.
That's what music should do.
Yep.